Pretoria, always good to speak to you. So this has been a recurring problem in the country where you hear about how foreigners, particularly from other parts of Africa, are said to be involved in crime in South Africa. How do we resolve it once and for all?
Right. Thank you very much, Thembekile. And I think one of the key issues is obviously over the past couple of weeks, there has been a lot in terms of reports, particularly around trafficking in persons as well as smuggling into South Africa. And of course, because these are transnational crimes, the perpetrators will include foreign nationals, whether from neighboring countries or further afield. What, unfortunately, the memoranda does not acknowledge nor work towards is recognizing the complicity and the role of South African nationals within these organized crime syndicates. Ultimately, crime is crime and ought to be addressed appropriately. When we scapegoat particular nationalities as the only perpetrators of that crime, we actually don't address the problem, but rather we seek to displace it.
And just on that, the point that you're making about speaking to specific people when we're trying to identify those behind the crime, right? The reality is in South Africa, you do have foreigners who are involved in crime in the country. We do also have a problem with xenophobia. So why have we so far, I remember the violence of 2008, 12 years later, we've not been able to properly separate the two and tackle them with as much vigor on both ends?
Yeah, because we're not really addressing the root problems. And if you'll allow me, Thembekile, I think it's important to actually clarify what those are. So where it relates to xenophobic sentiments in South Africa towards particularly African foreign nationals, but also nationals from Southeast Asia, this is rooted in part in the lack of opportunities for South African nationals that then makes it easy, I would say, to attribute blame to foreign nationals, whether it is that people are unemployed, which is a real problem, whether it's violence and crime within society, which is also a real problem, and the prevailing inequality, it becomes easy to attribute that blame to foreign nationals. We have a history of segregation and aggravated tensions along racial lines that then plays out when it comes to xenophobia. When it comes to the crime issue, which is a real issue likewise, we find that within South Africa, we have a crime and violence problem. Yesterday, the release of the 30 hotspots, crime hotspots, as it relates to gender-based violence were released. These are predominantly and unfortunately in lower income areas, in our townships, and in communities that have still struggled to find proper cohesion. And so these, again, this is a key challenge that needs to be addressed. And in order for us to do it, we do need to go to the heart of the problems. We need to address the issues related to crime in South Africa, and we cannot do that by passing it only to foreign nationals. And don't get me wrong, this is not to say that foreign nationals are not committing crime in South Africa. They are. Likewise, South Africans are committing crime, and we need to be upping our criminal justice capacity to be able to detect, investigate, and then eventually prosecute this criminality. And at the same time, we need to have proper community-level engagements around who the perpetrators in those societies are and how best do we deal with them.
And is
this is not sustainable.
Oh, excuse me for coming in there. Is that a process that should be led by the government?
It is a process in which government needs to be a player, but also a process, I believe, that needs to be done at community level and through community engagement, through various fora that have been established through the Department of Social Development, but also supported by DOJ. We've seen how anti-xenophobia forums actually help. And the only way you can get this done is having the community on board. Government on its own is not going to solve this problem, but at the same time, government cannot be absent in these conversations, and they cannot be stoking tensions in society. Ultimately, and let me end here, Thembekile, on this point, a lot of the issues frustrating society right now, whether it's the crime and violence, whether it's the lack of jobs and opportunities, whether it's poverty and inequality, are areas in which government ought to be engaging in. Instead of attributing blame elsewhere, they ought to take responsibility in this regard and lead the process, but to do so with the communities directly.
And today's marchers went to the Zimbabwe and Nigerian embassies, right? What should the governments of other countries be doing at this point? Because ultimately, should this escalate further, it would be their citizens who are impacted in some way.
Indeed, and we've seen this already from last year when both the Zimbabwean embassy, the Nigerian High Commission, but also Malawi and the DRC responded in trying to get some of their citizens out of the country, essentially to safety. But like I said earlier, this is not a sustainable approach. We're dealing with this in an ad hoc manner, when it's actually a systemic problem. Right now, as South Africa chairs the African Union, next year it will go to the DRC, South Africa has an opportunity to engage constructively with the other member states on this question. But also, the other member states ought to take responsibility. This cannot be left to the South African government on its own, because the more we have recurrences of this, the more it becomes our norm.
Otile Manganidze from the ISS, good to speak to you this afternoon. Thank you.